Germany's economy didn't grow at all last quarter, after shrinking 0.2% the quarter before it. That means that the German economy hasn't grown for 2 quarters and has only grown 0.6% over last year. That's a really bad performance. If you compare it to population growth, Germany's population is growing at 0.42%, meaning that in per capita terms, their economy is only growing at 0.2%, or it's barely growing at all in per capita terms. So this performance is really horrible. Granted, it's only about 2 quarters, but coming off a period of stronger growth, but if, Germany's growth after next quarter is still pretty bad, then Germany's general economic performance as a whole is just going to be awful. I'm going to bring up this article from the week to talk about what they're saying about this in greater detail. Why the German economy is sputtering. Here's the article. The German economy ground to a halt in the fourth quarter of last year. For the most economic observers, this was a startling development. Despite the never-ending economic crisis racking Europe, Germany seemed like a perpetual bright spot, steadily clocking in 2% real GDP growth since 2014. But in the last year, Germany's growth nosedived and officially hit zero in 2018's final months. If it falls any further, Europe's biggest economy will be in recession territory. The story of how this happened begins with a straightforward fact. Exports are nearly half of the German economy. Between 1970 and 1995, exports slowly rose from 15% to a little over 20% of Germany's GDP. But from 1995 to today, its exports exploded by another 25 percentage points and stood at more than 47% as of 2017. An enormous portion of Germany's workers and businesses rely on foreign consumers to buy their goods and services. In slightly more technical terms, roughly half the German economy relies on demand created in other countries, rather than on demand it creates itself to keep humming. If those other economies stop providing that demand, either because of their economy tanks, or because they make a policy choice not to, Germany's economy gets dragged down, and starting last year, that all happened on several fronts. First were President Donald Trump's steel tariffs cut into America's demand for German steel products. Then there was the slowdown in China's economy. The Asian behemoth only hit 6.6% GDP growth in 2018, its lowest level in roughly 30 years, and one that's still falling. So China's economy is slowing down. But there are other factors that are causing a decline in Chinese demand for German goods. China is basically industrialized, so any further growth would be less capital intensive with less demand for German goods. China is also moving up the value chain, meaning it's infilling its supply chain and starting to compete directly with Germany, meaning it will decrease its imports. It's starting to directly make some of the goods it's importing from Germany. So even if China went back to growing at 10%, because of these other two reasons, we're going to see continually falling demand for German goods from China. Okay. The last part of this article. As a result, Berlin spent the last decade running very small fiscal deficits, or more recently, surpluses. The smaller a government's deficit is, the less demand its fiscal policy is adding to the economy. If a government is running a surplus, it's taking demand out of its economy. If tight monetary policy is also keeping a lid on things, there's only one place Germany can go to get more demand where it needs it: other countries. Germany doesn't just export a ton, it has run a huge trade surplus since the 90s, lately reaching 7.5% of GDP. It exports much more than it imports. Germany basically treats other countries' demand the same way oil companies treat the Panorama Basement: one-way extraction. This certainly annoys those other nations, but it also leaves Germany without any options whenever those other economies tank, or if they cut Germany off. It's also worth mentioning that this all came with cost for ordinary Germans even before last year. Running trade surpluses requires keeping your exports competitive. That means holding down cost, which quite often mean labor cost, i.e. workers' incomes. For 40% of Germans, real wages actually fell over the last 2 decades. Germany's inequality has gotten considerably worse, and its poverty rates are rising. This too is a consequence of the squeeze the German policymakers' elite deliberately put on their own economy. Ironically, they did all this because it seemed reasonable. Tight money and low inflation, balanced budgets, trade surpluses, all those things are supposedly evidence of sober and mature leadership. But as Germany is now painfully learning, economies are not morality plays. A lot of Germany's economic progress for years was based on holding down wages to remain economically competitive. And so real incomes actually declined over the period in the 90s and 2000s. After 2014, incomes began rising along with economic growth again, but now Germany's economy stopped growing. Germany should be running larger fiscal deficits because it has the fiscal space, and its economy could use the stimulus, but such measures would only buy time. France's economy ran huge deficits during the 2010s. From 2011 to 2015, France ran huge fiscal deficits of over 4% of GDP, and it wasn't enough to get it growing much at all. During the period, the French economy didn't grow above 1% at all, which is a really, really low growth rate. During this period also, France's population was growing 0.5%, so in per capita terms, their economy was only growing at 0.5%. It took the combination of plunging oil prices, combined with huge stimulus of the ECB on top of that, to get France to even get a little more growth for a year. And even now, that's running out of steam because France's economy is doing worse. It's the correct policy action, but it's not going to be enough to get Germany permanently out of this mess, and the trends that I'm talking about keep persisting. It's lost its source of growth, it stopped growing, and I don't think it's going to get its source of growth back anytime soon, because of shifting structural factors in China and other economies. Basically, the only reason Germany has performed better than other European countries, like, say, France or Italy, was because it was fueling its economic growth and exports. But now, because that sources of exports have run out, Germany is left with nothing, and its economic performance is going to now be in line with France and Italy. That's it for my video. Please remember to share this with anyone you think you might be interested. Like, subscribe, comment, go to my main channel page for more videos, subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.